It started as just another celebrity interview until Samuel L. Jackson looked into the camera and said something about Trump that made the entire country stop breathing. It began with a single sentence that stopped every late-night viewer in their tracks. Samuel L. Jackson, sitting across from host Brian Kelly on the Nightline Forum, leaned forward, looked straight into the camera and said, "I heard things come out of that man's mouth that no president should ever say, not in private, not in public, not ever." The crowd gasped. Brian froze. No one was sure whether to laugh or brace for what was coming next. Samuel wasn't joking. For a moment the studio fell into silence, the kind of silence that feels thick where the audience's breath becomes part of the sound. He sat there calm but sharp, every word landing like a stone in still water. Brian finally broke the tension. "Samuel, are you saying you've personally heard President Trump make comments like that?" Samuel didn't hesitate. "I'm not saying like that, I'm saying exactly that. I was standing right there when he said it." The room stirred. A few nervous laughs escaped from the audience. Brian tried to regain control of the conversation, but Samuel was already deep into it. His voice carried the same conviction that made him one of Hollywood's most commanding presences. He described how months earlier he had attended a celebrity golf event at the Trump National Golf Club in Palm Beach. It was supposed to be a charity thing: cameras, cocktails, polite smiles. But according to Samuel, what he heard there was beyond anything I'd ever heard from a sitting president. Brian's cue card slipped from his hand. Producers behind the glass gestured frantically, trying to steer the segment away, but it was too late. Samuel went on. He said, "Hollywood only loves me when I make them money. The rest of the time they're pretending to be woke." Then he laughed, and after that he said something I can't repeat on TV about who he thought really controlled the industry. "I'll just say this, it wasn't pretty." A stunned audience member gasped audibly. The camera cut to Brian, whose usual charm had vanished. He looked like he'd stepped into something he wasn't ready for. Samuel didn't blink. He added, "You can't lead a country when you don't respect half the people living in it." The crowd erupted, applause mixed with shock. Some clapped out of agreement, others just out of disbelief. The producers cut to commercial early, but the damage was done. That 30-second segment would replay across every social media platform within hours. When the broadcast resumed, Brian tried to lighten the mood, but Samuel was already miles ahead of the script. He wasn't there to entertain, he was there to be heard. "People keep saying celebrities should stay out of politics," he said, his voice rising slightly, "but when politics walks right into your life, into your industry, into your dinner table, you don't have the privilege of silence anymore." The studio audience gave a standing ovation. Even Brian had to smile, though his producer's voice in his earpiece was probably screaming for him to move on. After the show wrapped, Samuel left the studio quietly, refusing interviews. Cameras followed him to the black SUV waiting outside, but he didn't say another word. He didn't have to. His silence spoke louder than the entire broadcast that night. Clips from the interview hit every platform within minutes. On Twitter, hashtags like hashtag Samuel said it and hashtag Jackson fused Trump climbed to the top of trending lists. Millions watched the clip, some cheering, others furious. In Los Angeles, talk show hosts scrambled to rewrite their monologues. In Washington, aides at the White House were already drafting statements. What Samuel had done wasn't just speak out, he had thrown the first punch in what would become one of the biggest political storms of the decade. But the strangest part, those who knew him best said he'd been planning to speak up for a while, he just hadn't decided when. Until that night the country went to bed with one question echoing through living rooms, group chats, and newsrooms alike: what exactly did the president say that was so bad that Samuel L. Jackson, a man known for fearlessness, looked genuinely disgusted, recounting it on live TV? But before anyone could answer that, the truth about that golf event in Palm Beach began to resurface, and the story took a turn no one saw coming. The morning after Samuel's interview, news outlets across the country scrambled for answers. Every detail of that Palm Beach golf event was suddenly front-page material. Reporters dug into guest lists, photos, and video archives, searching for anything that could confirm what he'd said. But for those who were actually there, the memory of that day was already burned into their minds. It was late spring, a humid morning at Trump National Golf Club in Palm Beach. The sky was too bright, the air too heavy, the kind of day when the Florida sun made everyone squint. Celebrities, donors, and politicians milled around with drinks in hand, smiling for photos they'd later pretend not to remember. Samuel L. Jackson wasn't there for politics, he was there because of an old friend, a retired athlete named Jerome Tate, who had invited him. Samuel almost didn't go, but Jerome convinced him. "It's for the kids' hospital, man," he'd said. "One game, a few pictures, and you're out." That sounded simple enough, but nothing about that day turned out to be simple. As Samuel arrived, he noticed the crowd was heavier on executives than athletes, suits, cigars, and whispers about deals filled the air. Trump was already holding court near the first tee, red cap, wide grin, surrounded by donors hanging on every word. Jerome elbowed Samuel. "There he is, you ready?" Samuel gave him a side glance. "Man, I came to hit golf balls, not talk politics." But Trump had other plans. The president spotted Samuel instantly and waved him over. "Sam, my favorite actor, come here, you're with us today," he said, patting him on the back. As cameras flashed, Samuel forced a polite smile. "Sure thing, Mr. President. The round started friendly enough, light jokes, golf banter, photographers trailing behind, but halfway through the tone shifted. Trump began talking about Hollywood, the media, and the people who pretend to hate him. Samuel mostly kept quiet until Trump said something that made his grip tighten on the club. You know what's funny, Trump said, leaning close enough for only a few people to hear. They act like they're against me, but when it's time to make money they all come running. Hollywood doesn't care who's president, they care who pays. Jerome gave Samuel a quick look, silently urging him not to respond, but Trump wasn't finished. And another thing, he said, chuckling, you ever notice who runs all those studios, who writes those scripts? It's not who people think. Samuel turned toward him slowly. What's that supposed to mean? Trump smirked. You know what I mean, you've been in the business long enough. The air went cold. The Secret Service nearby shifted slightly, sensing the tension. Jerome cleared his throat and tried to move things along. Hey, anyone up for another round? Trump laughed it off, waved at a few cameras, and walked toward the next hole, but Samuel stood still, eyes locked on the man's back. Later at the clubhouse, the conversation picked up again, this time with more people around. Trump, feeling relaxed, spoke freely about actors, directors, and race in entertainment. He tossed out comments like grenades, each one drawing uneasy glances. One moment stuck with everyone at the table. A producer joked about Hollywood types being too sensitive, and Trump responded, that's because they've convinced themselves they're the victims, but they're the ones with all the money, all the power, they just don't want to admit it. Samuel leaned back, watching. You really believe that? Trump shrugged. I call it how I see it. People love when I say what they're thinking. No, Samuel said quietly, you say what you want people to think. There's a difference. For a second, no one moved. The table went silent again, just like in that studio months later. Trump gave him a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. You've always been a little too serious, Sam, that's why you'll never get it. This is entertainment, all of it. That was the moment Samuel decided he'd had enough. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and said, you're right about one thing, it is entertainment until someone gets hurt. He walked out of the clubhouse, cameras following him once more, though that footage never made it to the evening news. Jerome caught up with him outside. You okay? he asked. Samuel nodded. I'm fine, just tired of pretending. Neither of them talked about that day again, not until the interview, when Samuel later told Brian Keller that what he heard was beyond anything I'd ever heard from a sitting president. That was the conversation he was talking about, the one where Trump dropped his guard and said the kind of things people only say when they think no one will call them out. And Samuel knew that by finally speaking, he wasn't just putting himself in the middle of a storm, he was lighting the fuse on purpose. But while Samuel was trying to move on from that day, the rest of America was just beginning to catch fire over what he'd said. By midnight, Samuel L. Jackson's interview had taken over the internet. News alerts flashed across phones, talk shows replayed the clip on loop, and social media couldn't keep up with the comments flooding in by the second. Some called him brave, others called him reckless, but nobody ignored him. Clips of that moment, his firm stare, his calm delivery, and that now famous line, you can't lead a country when you don't respect half the people living in it, spread across platforms like wildfire. It wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. A montage of reactions filled the next morning's broadcasts. On one channel, a conservative commentator accused Jackson of trying to revive his career by attacking the president. On another, a civil rights lawyer called the moment a rare act of honesty in Hollywood. At a diner in Clearwater, Florida, two men sat at the counter watching the replay on TV. He's got guts, I'll give him that, one said, stirring his coffee. Yeah, but guts don't mean he's right, the other shot back. You think Trump's the first president to say something wild behind closed doors? It wasn't just political talk, it became personal. Families argued at breakfast tables, co-workers whispered about it in break rooms, and even people who didn't care about politics had an opinion about the Samuel thing. The clip dominated every screen, even overseas. It ran on international news. A BBC anchor introduced the story as a rare Hollywood confrontation that's shaken Washington. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Samuel woke up to hundreds of missed calls. His agent, his publicist, and half the entertainment industry wanted to know if he realized what he'd just done. He sat at his kitchen table scrolling through his phone. The comments were a mix of love and hate, praise from fans, threats from strangers, and dozens of celebrities quietly messaging support. His longtime friend, actress Denise Hollow, called him first. Sam, do you know what's happening online right now? Yeah, he said, apparently I started World War III from my chair. You said what everyone's been too afraid to say. You just better be ready for the fire that's coming. He chuckled softly. I've been through worse fires, but the fire was already roaring out of control. By noon, reporters were camped outside his home. News vans lined the street, microphones waving. As soon as his door opened, Samuel didn't speak, he just gave a short wave and got into his car. Inside the White House, it was a different scene. The president's communications team gathered in the press room, watching the clip over and over again. One aide slammed her notebook shut. We need a response before noon, she said. Another aide sighed. If we ignore it, it goes away. If he responds, it doubles the coverage. Everyone looked at each other, knowing exactly which option Trump would pick. At 11 a.m., the first tweet hit washed Up actor Samuel L. Jackson making up stories again. Hollywood will say anything for ratings. Sad within minutes it was headline news. The network's cut from regular programming to breaking coverage on the Morning Ledger anchor Todd Hensley read the tweet live and then said, well, that didn't take long. Across the country people watched as the story split America in two. Those who supported Samuel saw him as a truth teller. Those who supported Trump saw him as a traitor to his own country. The comment sections online were brutal. Go back to acting, one read. Another said, finally someone said what needed to be said, but Samuel didn't respond. Not to the tweets, not to the noise. He stayed quiet. That evening a clip surfaced of a reporter shouting a question at him outside a restaurant in Beverly Hills. Mr. Jackson, do you regret what you said? He turned, looked directly into the camera and said, no, I regret not saying it sooner. That sentence became the next viral quote within hours. T-shirts and memes appeared online with the phrase printed in bold white letters. The country was divided, but the momentum was all in his favor. Every attempt to discredit him seemed to make him look stronger. Political analysts debated the situation all night on CNN. One commentator said, this isn't about a celebrity, this is about truth versus perception. Samuel L. Jackson just forced the country to choose which one it believes in. By midnight, something unexpected happened. A leaked video from that Palm Beach golf event began circulating online. A short clip showing Trump, Samuel and a few others laughing by the 10th hole. It didn't prove much, but it confirmed that the encounter had indeed taken place. That was enough to make the story real in people's minds. The country had gone from gossip to evidence, from talk show chatter to a national conversation, and while the president's team tried to control the damage, late-night hosts had a field day. Comedian Troy Randall opened his monologue with Samuel L. Jackson just said what Alexa's been afraid to. The audience roared, but amid the laughter something serious was happening. People were starting to ask what kind of comments a president could make privately and who else might have heard them. But while America debated, the White House was preparing to strike back harder than anyone expected. By sunrise the tension between Hollywood and Washington had exploded into open warfare. Cable news anchors called it the biggest celebrity political clash since the Reagan years, while others said it was a masterclass in presidential outrage. Whatever it was, it dominated every conversation in America. Inside the West Wing the atmosphere was electric, not the kind that energized people but the kind that made tempers flare and staffers whisper behind closed doors. Phones buzzed constantly. Reporters camped outside the White House gates. Every aide who walked past the press area could feel the pressure boiling over. At 7:15 a.m. Trump stormed into the communications room. His hair looked uncombed, his expression sharp, his voice booming. Who told me he was harmless? He barked, slamming his phone on the table. That actor just called me racist on live television. A staffer tried to calm him. Mr. President, he didn't call you racist directly. Trump cut her off. He didn't have to. You think people don't know what he meant? He pointed toward the TV screen where Samuel's interview was replaying again. The line, you can't lead a country when you don't respect half the people living in it, scrolled in captions beneath Trump's angry reflection. Communications Director Paula Myers stepped forward. Sir, if we ignore it the story will burn itself out, but if you respond. I already responded, Trump said, gesturing toward his phone. You saw my tweet? Paula nodded carefully. Yes sir, the issue is that tweet made it worse. Networks are using it as proof that you're rattled. Trump's face reddened. I'm not rattled, I'm angry. There's a difference. The room went silent. Nobody dared correct him. Meanwhile, outside on the South Lawn, reporters shouted questions at Press Secretary Ron Ralston as he made his morning walk. Ron, will the president apologize to Samuel L. Jackson? One called out. Ralston laughed dryly. Apologize for what? The president didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Jackson is an actor trying to stay relevant. Another reporter pressed. So you're saying the conversation didn't happen? Ralston hesitated just long enough for cameras to catch it. I'm saying Mir Jackson's version of events is, let's say, dramatic. The clip aired on every major network within the hour. By noon, the White House had drafted an official statement denying that Trump made any inappropriate remarks at the golf event, but the wording was awkward. It didn't fully deny the meeting, just the characterization of what was said. That careful phrasing only fueled more questions. At a press conference that afternoon, Ralston tried to hold the line. The president engages with countless individuals every day. He's confident in his relationships across industries and rejects any attempt to twist casual remarks into political scandal. A reporter shot back. So you're confirming he did speak to Mr. Jackson? Ralston adjusted his tie. I'm confirming the president meets a lot of people. Laughter erupted among the press corps. Ralston's face flushed. The briefing ended abruptly in California. Samuel watched it all from his living room. The blinds were half drawn. The TV muted. His friend Jerome called again. They're losing it, man. Jerome said, you saw that briefing? They look like they're guessing. That's what happens when you tell the truth. Samuel replied, people start panicking because they can't control it. Jerome hesitated. You sure you want to keep this going? They'll dig up everything, old interviews, old photos, anything they can twist. Let them. Samuel said, I've got nothing to hide. That same night, Trump held a rally in Pensacola. The crowd was loud, waving flags and signs chanting his name. When he brought up Samuel, they erupted again. "I've known a lot of actors," Trump shouted into the mic, "but this one's got a bad attitude. He thinks he can insult your president and get away with it. Not on my watch." The crowd cheered and Trump grinned, feeding off the energy he's out there saying, "I said terrible things, lies, total lies. I was nothing but nice to him, asked him to join my foursome, but you know these Hollywood types, they don't appreciate anything." The clip went viral not because of what he said but because of how angry he looked, saying it. His voice cracked, his gestures sharp. To his supporters it was passion, to everyone else it looked like panic. By the next morning, fact checkers released side-by-side comparisons, photos of Samuel and Trump at the golf club, timestamps, witness accounts. Trump's denial was unraveling fast. Still, the administration doubled down. Fox hosts began describing Jackson as Hollywood's new attack dog. Commentators accused him of trying to destroy unity. By now the country was divided down the middle, half convinced Samuel L. Jackson had just exposed something dark, the other half accusing him of fabricating the story for attention. Yet while Washington spun itself into chaos, Samuel remained almost unnervingly calm. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't apologizing, he was waiting. 2 days after Trump's rally in Pensacola, Samuel agreed to appear on Good Morning America. The producers had begged him for a follow-up interview, and after seeing the White House twist his words, he finally said yes. The studio was packed, every seat filled, cameras ready, lights bright enough to wash the room in silver. When Samuel walked onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet. It wasn't applause for a movie star this time, it was for a man standing in a political firestorm and refusing to back down. Host Robin Torres began gently, "Samuel, it's been a wild few days. The president's called you a liar, said your story never happened, and even some networks are questioning your motives. Why speak out now?" He leaned forward, hands clasped, "Because silence is how power keeps winning. People talk big behind closed doors and the rest of us pretend not to hear it. I just decided I wasn't going to pretend anymore." Robin nodded, careful to keep the tone balanced. "You've said others were present during that golf event. Are any of them willing to come forward?" Samuel smiled slightly. "Maybe. Let's just say I wasn't the only one there who remembers how that day went." The audience murmured. Robin pressed, "So there were witnesses?" Samuel's gaze didn't flinch. "I'm not naming names, but yeah, people heard what I heard. They're just scared. I get it. The moment you speak out against power, the whole machine turns against you." The segment aired live within minutes. Clips flooded social media again. Hashtags like #IStandWithSamuel Samuel trended alongside #Trump versus Jackson. News outlets cut their programming mid-hour to replay the exchange. Back in Washington, aides scrambled to prepare counterpoints. One even suggested finding proof that Samuel wasn't at the club that day, but photographs had already confirmed he was. As the press spun theories, something began shifting among Hollywood insiders. Quietly, a few recognizable names started to show support. On Instagram, a famous director posted, "I was at that event." He's not lying. The post was deleted within hours, but screenshots spread instantly. Then another name surfaced, retired baseball legend Jerome Tate, the same friend who had brought Samuel to the golf outing. TMZ tracked him down outside a training camp in Tampa. "Mr. Tate, were you with Samuel L. Jackson that day at Trump's club?" He hesitated before answering, "Yeah, I was there." "Did the conversation happen like he said?" Jerome paused, clearly weighing his words. "Let's just say I remember enough to understand why he said what he said." The clip went viral overnight. Suddenly the story wasn't about claims anymore, it was about credibility. Two well-known figures were now on record hinting the conversation was real. Meanwhile, Trump's team grew more desperate. Another series of tweets came from the president's account calling Samuel ungrateful, phony, and a Hollywood radical. But this time the tone backfired. Even conservative outlets began quietly questioning whether the White House was overreacting. That evening, Samuel sat down for dinner at a quiet restaurant in Sherman Oaks with a few friends. No entourage, no security detail, just a man trying to have a meal without headlines. A waiter approached shyly. "Mr. Jackson, I just wanted to say my mom watched your interview. She cried, said she felt like someone finally said what we've all been thinking." Samuel smiled. "Tell your mom I said thank you." As the waiter left, Denise Hollow leaned over. "You realize you've turned into the people's actor now, right?" He laughed softly. "I didn't plan on it, I just told the truth." She looked at him seriously. "That's exactly why it worked." The truth was, Samuel hadn't expected his words to catch fire like this, but once they did, he refused to water them down. "If you start walking back your truth," he said later in an interview, "it stops being truth, it becomes performance, and I've done enough pretending for a lifetime." The following day, the Los Angeles Tribune ran a front-page story titled "Jackson Won't Blink." It painted him as a man standing against power, unshaken, unafraid. Cable networks picked it up, and by that evening political commentators began referring to him as the Hollywood conscience. Some mocked the label, others embraced it. Either way, Samuel was no longer just an actor in the public's eyes, he was a voice. Meanwhile, whispers started to circulate among insiders at the golf club in Palm Beach. Employees who'd worked at that event began talking anonymously to journalists, saying they'd heard tension and awkward remarks. One even hinted that security footage might still exist. Samuel didn't confirm or deny it, he simply kept his composure, saying during one interview, "People will see what they need to see when they're ready. I don't need to convince anyone. The truth has its own timeline." And with that He walked off set, leaving viewers staring at their screens in silence. But while Samuel stood calm in the storm, others in Hollywood were starting to tremble because some of them had been there too, and they knew the truth was about to get louder. By the end of the week, the conversation had stretched far beyond politics. It was no longer just about Samuel and Trump, it was about the entertainment industry itself. The kind of whispers that usually stayed behind mansion gates were now leaking into public view. Los Angeles turned into a battlefield of opinions. At morning coffee spots in Studio City, producers leaned close to each other, speaking in low voices. Some praised Samuel's courage, others cursed his timing. "He just painted a target on all of us," one agent muttered, stirring his espresso. The story had become impossible to ignore. That Friday evening, the Screen Actors Guild held a private dinner at a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills. What was supposed to be a calm industry gathering turned into a political war zone. Attendees split into groups, each arguing about whether Samuel had gone too far. Director Avery Knox slammed his drink down. He said what needed to be said. "You think anyone else would have had the guts to challenge the president live on TV?" Veteran producer Leonard Hayes shook his head. "You don't pick a fight with the most powerful man in the world unless you're ready to lose everything. He's risking careers, not just his own." At the next table, whispers spread that one of the guests had actually been at the Palm Beach event. All eyes shifted toward a film executive named Raymond Foxwell, a man known for being connected, quiet, and dangerously observant. He took a long sip of wine before saying softly what he said wasn't exaggerated. The room froze. A reporter who had somehow slipped into the dinner overheard it. Within hours, gossip sites were running headlines like "Top Producer Confirms Samuel's Account," though Foxwell later denied saying it. The damage was done. Hollywood insiders began calling reporters eager to share their versions of that day. Each story added a new layer. One said Trump had made jokes about diversity quotas, another mentioned remarks about who controls what movies get made. The details differed, but the theme stayed the same. The remarks were real and they were ugly. Social media caught wind fast. Actors, directors, and comedians began taking sides publicly on Twitter. A young actress wrote, "Samuel didn't speak up to start chaos, he spoke up because silence was already killing people's voices." A few minutes later, a prominent conservative actor responded, "We're entertainers, not activists. Some people should stick to their lines." And just like that, Hollywood turned against itself. Television talk shows hosted fiery panels with mixed guests. One night, comedian Chris Vaughn and actress Linda Sterling argued live on air. "He told the truth," Linda said firmly. "We all know what's been said in those rooms. We just pretend it doesn't matter because we don't want to lose jobs." "Truth or not," Chris countered, "he's feeding division. You can't fix hate with more hate." The audience erupted in applause and boos at the same time. But the real turning point came when an anonymous source sent an email to several journalists claiming to have audio from that Palm Beach golf event. They said it was recorded accidentally. A security camera microphone near the clubhouse had picked up fragments of conversation. Most reporters dismissed it at first. Fake recordings were nothing new in the media world, but then one investigative journalist from the Daily Chronicle, Renee Hallbrook, managed to obtain the file. She didn't publish it immediately. Instead, she played it for a small group of editors late at night. The audio was muffled, unclear, but certain phrases were audible and unmistakable. You could hear laughter, clinking glasses, and a familiar voice saying something about Hollywood pretending to be moral while cashing my checks. The laughter faded, followed by a quieter sentence that made the room go still. "People think they run this industry. They don't, they just make noise." It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone listening. By morning, the clip had leaked online. Within hours, it had over 10 million views. The caption read, "Is this the Trump-Jackson conversation caught on tape?" While authenticity was still being verified, the timing couldn't have been worse for the White House. Every network played it in slow motion, with analysts dissecting each word, debating whether it was real. At the same time, Trump's legal team issued a statement calling the recording fabricated garbage, threatening lawsuits against anyone who broadcast it. But the harder they tried to bury it, the faster it spread. Back in Hollywood, Samuel stayed silent, deliberately so. His publicist told journalists, "Mr. Jackson isn't commenting on the recording." That silence only made people more curious. Behind closed doors, some of Samuel's friends urged him to release his own statement, to take control of the narrative, but he refused. "You don't fight truth with noise," he told Denise Hollow over the phone. "You just wait. The truth always makes noise on its own." That same night, Samuel's old friend Jerome called him again. "It's getting wild out here, man. People are scared. Some of the guys from that day are talking to lawyers. They should be scared," Samuel said calmly, "because if that tape's real, they can't hide anymore." He looked out his living room window at the city lights stretching endlessly down Ventura Boulevard. For once, Los Angeles looked small, like a stage where everyone was finally being forced to drop their masks. But just as Hollywood was tearing itself apart, a new player stepped forward, someone who had proof that would change the entire story forever. By now, the story had outgrown Hollywood. It wasn't about celebrity gossip anymore. It had become a mirror reflecting the country's deepest divisions. Every corner of America seemed to take a side. Every conversation carried tension. Cable news anchors started opening their shows with split-screen Samuel L. Jackson's calm interview on one side and Trump's furious rally clips on the other. It was an image of two Americas staring at each other, neither blinking. In small towns and cities alike, people were fighting over it, not physically but emotionally. In diners, churches, and barber shops, the argument sounded the same everywhere. Was he right to say it? At a barber shop in Dayton, Ohio, a group of men argued while the TV played the latest coverage. He's an actor, one customer said, shaking his head. He reads lines for a living. What makes him the moral authority? The barber snapped back. He was there. You think he'd risk his reputation if it wasn't true? Man, people risk their reputations for attention every day. The argument got louder until the shop owner turned up the TV volume to drown them out. Across the country, demonstrations started forming. In Los Angeles, hundreds gathered outside the CNN building holding signs reading "We believe Samuel." In Washington, D.C., Trump supporters held their own rally chanting "Hollywood lies" while waving flags. The divide wasn't just political, it was cultural, emotional, personal. Talk shows thrived on the drama. Networks invited legal experts, psychologists, even body language analysts to dissect Samuel's posture, his tone, and whether he looked too composed to be telling the truth. Others analyzed Trump's hand gestures at his rallies, claiming they showed defensive aggression. Everyone was suddenly an expert on something, and yet behind all the noise, one fact kept surfacing every time the White House attacked Samuel. His approval among the public went up. His followers on social media tripled in a week. People began quoting his lines, "Silence is how power keeps winning," like a mantra. In Philadelphia, high school students organized an open discussion about truth and leadership. A teacher named Dana Lopez told her class, "What matters isn't who said it. What matters is that we're finally asking what kind of behavior we'll accept from people in power." But not everyone agreed. In Texas, a talk radio host ranted for 3 straight days about Hollywood elites trying to control the country. His listeners flooded the station with calls vowing to boycott Samuel's movies. A few even burned DVDs live on social media. Dramatic gestures that only made the story trend harder. Meanwhile, Samuel kept his composure. He wasn't doing press tours or feeding the frenzy. He was letting the country argue while he stayed focused on something bigger, truth. At one point, his daughter called him from Atlanta. "Dad, people at my job were arguing about you today. Good or bad?" He asked. "Both, but they're talking." "That's something." He smiled quietly. "That's all I ever wanted." Back in Washington, Trump's inner circle was unraveling. The president's legal team was furious about the leaked recording. His advisors couldn't agree on a strategy. One aide even suggested suing Samuel directly, but another reminded them that would mean going to court and potentially having that recording examined publicly. Instead, Trump doubled down at another rally in Tulsa. "These fake stories, these fake people, they're trying to divide us, but guess what? We're stronger than them." The crowd roared, yet behind that energy was fatigue. Even his most loyal supporters were beginning to look uneasy. The rallies were louder but shorter. The outrage was real but repetitive. Across the country, late-night comedians began pointing out how exhausted everyone seemed. One joked, "At this point, people are arguing about Samuel Jackson and Trump like they're rooting for rival sports teams." He wasn't wrong. Still, some moments broke through the chaos. During a Sunday service in Detroit, a pastor stood before his congregation and said, "Whether you love or hate either man, remember this truth doesn't need a side, it just needs courage." Clips of that sermon went viral, earning millions of views. For the first time, people weren't arguing about politics, they were talking about conscience. The White House, sensing the shift, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. They pushed new policy headlines, scheduled more rallies, even floated rumors about Samuel's political ambitions, but the public wasn't buying it. By the end of the week, posters reported something astonishing. A majority of Americans said they believed Samuel was telling the truth. That didn't mean they liked him, it just meant they trusted him more than they trusted Washington. And that terrified the people in power in Los Angeles. Samuel sat on his back porch late at night, scrolling through his phone. The glow lit up his face as he watched clips of protests and news debates. He wasn't smiling, just thinking. Denise called him again. "You've become a symbol," she said softly. "That's not what I wanted." "Maybe not, but symbols aren't chosen, they're made." He exhaled deeply. "If I'm going to be a symbol," he said, "I want it to stand for something true." But the next morning something surfaced that would do exactly that, and for once the evidence didn't come from Hollywood or Washington, but from someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. The morning started quietly until it didn't. At 6 a.m., a local news station in Palm Beach broke a story that would soon dominate the national conversation. An employee at Trump National Golf Club had come forward with what he called undeniable proof that Samuel L. Jackson's story was true. His name was Michael Reyes, a 38-year-old maintenance technician. Michael had worked at the golf club for nearly a decade. He wasn't famous, wealthy, or politically involved, just a regular guy who mowed lawns, fixed sprinklers, and kept to himself. But that morning everything changed. He sat down for an exclusive interview with the Palm Beach Ledger, his face half in shadow. "I wasn't looking to get involved," he said, "but I saw the news, saw everyone calling him a liar, and I couldn't just stay quiet anymore." The interviewer asked, "What did you see that day?" Michael took a deep breath. "I was working near the 10th Whole setting up equipment for the evening dinner. The president was there with his group. I recognized Samuel L. Jackson right away. They were talking and laughing at first, but then it got weirdly quiet. That's when I heard, well, let's just say it wasn't what you expect to hear from a president. He hesitated before continuing. There were comments about who runs Hollywood, who makes the money, who complains about fairness. It wasn't a joke. The tone wasn't playful, it was mean. The interviewer pressed, are you saying you personally heard the president make offensive remarks? Michael nodded slowly. Yes, I heard every word. Within hours the clip hit the internet. Major outlets picked it up immediately. CNN ran it under the headline, Golf Club Employee Confirms Jackson's Story. Fox News called it another liberal setup. Social media platforms went into chaos. Hashtags, debates, endless threads dissecting every sentence. Michael said the White House responded in less than 2 hours. A spokesperson dismissed the story as another manufactured stunt, but privately staffers were panicking. At the press briefing that afternoon, a reporter asked Ron Ralston, will the administration investigate the new claims made by the golf club employee? Ralston sighed audibly, we don't respond to every random person looking for 15 minutes of fame. Another reporter fired back, he's not random, he's been employed at the club for 10 years. Are you saying a long-term employee would risk his job to lie? Ralston stammered for a moment before ending the briefing. Early by evening, Michael Reyes was trending across every platform. Journalists dug into his background. No criminal record, no political donations, no sign of personal gain. He'd even refused payment for the interview, saying, I'm not here to make money, I'm here to tell the truth. Meanwhile, Samuel was at home watching the chaos unfold. Denise Hollow called him almost immediately. You seeing this? She asked. Yeah, he replied quietly. He just blew it wide open. Samuel exhaled slowly. That man just did what most people with power won't. He told the truth even though he didn't have to. Later that night, Samuel called his old friend Jerome. You remember that day? Samuel said, you know what was said? I do. He's risking everything to back up what we both heard. That's bravery, man. Jerome didn't answer right away. You think it's going to change anything? Samuel hesitated. It already has. Across the country, talk shows filled with speculation. Analysts debated Michael's motives while others praised his courage. One anchor said, this isn't about politics anymore, this is about conscience. Meanwhile, Michael's life turned upside down by the next morning. Reporters surrounded his small house in Lake Worth. He looked uncomfortable in front of the cameras, repeating that he only wanted to tell the truth. His wife, standing beside him, said softly, we knew speaking out would be hard, but silence would have been worse. The image of that couple, two regular people, standing on their porch against a storm of cameras, struck a chord with millions of Americans. In Washington, the president's team scrambled to respond. Some advisors pushed for a lawsuit, others urged silence, but Trump wanted action. At 7 a.m. he tweeted, fake story, low-level employee who's never met me making false claims for attention, total scam. But the problem was photos emerged within hours showing Trump shaking hands with Michael during a Marines Award ceremony in 2019. The caption read, recognizing loyal staff who keep our courses beautiful. The internet exploded. Late-night hosts mocked the tweet. One said, you can't call the guy fake when you literally gave him a plaque. The audience howled, but amid the humor, something serious was brewing that night. The Daily Chronicle released a new report confirming that the partial audio clip from earlier, the one many thought was fake, had been verified by experts as authentic. It was indeed recorded at Trump National Golf Club. Forensic audio specialists analyzed background noise, identifying real bird calls native to that area, confirming the timestamp matched the date of the event. Their conclusion, highly likely genuine. The story became unstoppable. Even people who had ignored it before now had to confront it. Talk shows invited constitutional scholars to discuss whether a president's private speech reflected his public responsibility. Op-eds flooded newspapers asking whether moral integrity should matter as much as political strength. And through it all, Samuel stayed quiet, watching as truth began speaking for itself. That night, sitting in his living room, he turned off the TV and whispered to himself, sometimes you don't have to fight, you just have to wait for the truth to catch up. But while the truth was finally catching up, the political machine was just getting started, and it wasn't going down without a fight. By the next morning, the entire nation was glued to their screens. The story had reached a boiling point, and now everyone wanted answers. The leaked audio had been verified. The golf club employee's statement had checked out. Even some of Trump's closest allies had gone silent. Something was shifting. The White House tried to contain the fallout, but the damage was already done. Every time they tried to downplay it, a new piece of evidence surfaced. By midweek, 3 more witnesses from the golf event had come forward anonymously, each confirming variations of the same conversation Samuel had described. One was a catering manager who said he overheard remarks that didn't sound like jokes. Another, a security contractor, admitted he'd been ordered to escort media crews away from the 10th hole that afternoon. Each new voice added weight to the story and made the denials look increasingly desperate. Inside the Oval Office, tension ran high. Paula Myers, the communications director, paced the carpet, papers in hand. Sir, she said carefully, this is spiraling. If we keep fighting the story, it looks like we're hiding something. Trump slammed his fist on the desk. We are not hiding anything, they're lying, and we're Going to prove it how Paula asked quietly. Trump paused staring at her. We sue everyone Jackson, that employee, the papers, the networks, all of them. Paula exhaled slowly. Sir, suing them will open discovery. That means their lawyers can subpoena records, communications, even security footage. You really want that? He didn't respond, he just turned toward the window, the reflection of his own face staring back at him from the glass. Meanwhile at Samuel's house in Sherman Oaks things felt eerily calm. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing for days. News producers, political figures, activists, even old co-stars he hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to talk, everyone wanted a quote, but Samuel had chosen to stay silent, not out of fear, out of principle. He believed the story no longer belonged to him, it belonged to the people who had seen it unfold. Still, his team convinced him to make one more statement. That evening he appeared on national television for what would become one of the most watched broadcasts of the year. He sat across from journalist Angela Reed on the Nightline Forum, the same program where it all began. The studio lights reflected softly off the polished desk. The air felt heavy with expectation. Angela started carefully. Samuel, this all began with one comment on this very show. Since then the president has denied everything, and yet the evidence keeps piling up. The country's divided. What do you say to people who think you made this political? He leaned back thoughtful. It's only political if you believe respect has a party. I didn't say what I said to take sides. I said it because leadership comes with accountability, and if you can't handle that, you don't deserve the job. The audience went silent, completely absorbed. Angela continued, do you think this will change anything? Samuel's expression softened. Maybe not right away, but it's made people talk. It's made them think. That's how change starts, not with noise but with awareness. He paused, then looked directly into the camera. You don't need to be famous to call out wrong when you see it, you just need to care enough not to stay quiet. The crowd erupted in applause. Some stood, some cried, and even Angela looked moved. Back at the White House, aides watched in tense silence. Paula turned off the TV halfway through. He's winning this, she murmured. Ron Rolston, the press secretary, shook his head. He's not just winning, he's rewriting the conversation. That night polls showed a massive swing in public sentiment, even among moderate voters. Trust in the president had dropped significantly. Meanwhile, Samuel's approval ratings skyrocketed, but the real turning point came the following day when the Daily Chronicle released a full unedited version of the golf course audio. It ran 6 minutes long, and there was no mistaking the voices. You could hear laughter, golf swings, and then Trump's unmistakable cadence. These people in Hollywood act like saints until the cameras turn off. They don't care about morals, they care about money. They pretend to hate me, but I made them richer than ever. Then came the quieter line that stunned the nation. America doesn't need more truth tellers, it needs entertainers. That's what people really want, a good show. The clip ended abruptly with Samuel's voice saying, then maybe that's the problem. No editing tricks, no ambiguity, it was real. Networks interrupted regular programming to play the recording in full. Analysts fell silent mid-segment, even conservative hosts struggled to spin it for a moment. The noise stopped and the truth stood on its own. The next morning Samuel's publicist called him. You've got every outlet asking for an exclusive. They're calling this the quote of the decade. Samuel shook his head. I'm done talking, the story's told itself. He turned off his phone and went outside. Standing under the early California sun, his neighbors waved at him from across the street, clapping quietly. For the first time since the interview, he allowed himself to smile. Later that afternoon, reporters shouted questions at the White House press gate. Does the president stand by his remarks? One asked. The press secretary hesitated, looked down, then walked away without answering. Cameras caught it all. That image of silent spokesperson avoiding the truth would define the day. By evening, a wave of editorials filled newspapers from coast to coast. The moment America chose sincerity over spin, when Hollywood spoke truth to power. The 6-minute tape that shook the presidency. For once the noise had meaning, but as the nation processed the fallout, Samuel wasn't celebrating, he was reflecting, because victory he knew meant nothing unless it led to understanding. When the storm finally began to settle, America didn't look the same. The noise had quieted, the shouting had faded, but the questions Samuel raised lingered in every newsroom, classroom, and living room across the country. For the first time in years, people were asking not who to believe but why. They had stopped believing anyone at all. Samuel L. Jackson had never set out to become a political figure. He wasn't trying to bring down a president, start a movement, or win applause, but that's what made his stand so powerful. It came from a place of raw honesty, not strategy. In the weeks that followed the release of the full audio, the national conversation shifted. Late-night comedians grew quiet, news anchors stopped shouting, politicians who once mocked Samuel began quoting him. His words, silence is how power keeps winning, appeared on protest signs, classroom walls, and even graffiti across city streets. But the most surprising reaction came from people who had once dismissed him in diners and churches across the Midwest. People who voted for Trump were admitting, sometimes quietly, that they didn't like what they had heard on that tape. I still support him, one man told a reporter, but I can't pretend that didn't sound wrong. That simple confession, I can't pretend, became the quiet theme of the nation's reckoning in Los Angeles. Samuel kept His life as ordinary as possible. He refused invitations to rallies and declined interviews. He spent his mornings walking through his neighborhood, stopping for coffee at the same small cafe he'd been visiting for years. People recognized him, of course, but instead of asking for selfies they simply said thank you. One morning an older woman approached him outside the cafe. She carried a Bible in her hand and spoke softly. "Mr. Jackson, I don't agree with everything you said," she admitted, "but I believe you said it because you care." He smiled. "That's the only reason worth saying anything." That kind of exchange, respectful human, had become rare in America, and yet that was the effect. His moment of honesty had created a reminder that disagreement didn't have to destroy dialogue. Meanwhile, inside the White House the mood had darkened. The president's advisors urged him to move on, but he couldn't let it go. Another tweet storm erupted, this time less fiery and more defensive. It didn't hit the same way anymore. The public had grown weary. Cable news shifted to other stories, but the shadow of the golf course tape still hung over everything. Every policy discussion, every press briefing, every public appearance was viewed through the lens of credibility. The administration's words were no longer just statements, they were evidence waiting to be cross-checked. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. It wasn't Congress, the media, or political rivals who had damaged the president's reputation. It was one actor with the courage to speak about something most people would have buried months later. When the dust had finally settled, Samuel appeared at a charity event in Chicago benefiting children's hospitals, one he'd quietly supported for years. Reporters were there hoping for a soundbite. He gave them one, but not the one they expected. Standing at the podium in front of a modest crowd, he said, "The truth isn't entertainment, it's not ratings, it's not headlines, it's responsibility. And if we want to fix what's broken, we can't keep confusing attention with honesty." The audience fell silent. Then came slow applause, not loud or theatrical but heartfelt. Later that night a reporter asked him outside, "Do you think you changed anything?" He smiled faintly. "Change doesn't happen in weeks, it happens in how people talk when the cameras aren't around. If we start listening, really listening, that's the start of something." And that was the truth. In classrooms teachers began using the Jackson moment, as some called it, to discuss accountability. Media schools taught it as a case study in the power of truth-telling. On social media, even months later, people still quoted his lines when politicians tried to dodge responsibility. But perhaps the biggest impact was invisible: the quiet reawakening of conscience in ordinary people, the belief that honesty, even when costly, mattered again. Jerome Tate, Samuel's longtime friend, summed it up best when a reporter asked what he thought of it all. "He didn't take down a man," Jerome said. "He reminded a country what integrity sounds like." In that sense, Samuel hadn't just won a public battle, he had helped reset the moral compass of a nation that had forgotten how to tell right from convenient. As the year came to a close, Samuel retreated from the spotlight. He returned to filming, reading scripts, and living quietly, but his words lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The story became less about Trump's outrage and more about a man who spoke when it mattered, and perhaps that's the lesson he left behind: that truth once spoken doesn't fade. It echoes, because courage isn't loud, it's steady. It's a man sitting under hot studio lights, choosing honesty over comfort, knowing the storm that will follow, and speaking anyway. Samuel L. Jackson didn't just call out a president, he called on a country to remember what respect, decency, and truth look like. And maybe that's why years from now people will remember not the controversy but the conviction. When truth becomes inconvenient, that's when it matters most to speak it. Silence may protect comfort, but courage protects integrity. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, question what you're told, because truth only lives when people are brave enough to defend it, even when it costs them everything.